And we published the piece finally.
Yeah, great. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, sorry it took so long. It took about 2 weeks longer to get the Medium piece published, but we just wanted to be very accurate on all of our numbers, what we were concluding. And thank you all who have read it for all the great comments. And what we intended to do is start a conversation that ties Bitcoin in with the macroeconomic picture. And we felt that this was the best way of doing it. As you know, we've concluded that the problem of debt and credit is out of hand. Originally, we thought there were 4 solutions to it. We now think there might be a 5th solution, which I was able to briefly talk about in the article just by naming it, which had to do with a basket of securities and commodities, including maybe gold and Bitcoin as a basket. But we're still doing a lot of analysis on that. I think everybody has heard us say that we think there are 4 solutions, which is Bitcoin, a gold standard, default on the debt, or growing out of the problem. And to that, we added a 5th, and we're going to do 4 more articles as in-depth as we can on each of the potential solutions. So we were glad to get that out. You just go to medium.com and you can put in Lucid Investment Strategies or the long and winding road to $10 million Bitcoin, and you can read that. I just quickly called this vlog today $10 million Bitcoin. I wanted to make a couple of quick clarifications from a number of comments that we've gotten. What Leah and I have concluded is the best solution to the problem of credit and debt would be Bitcoin. We are not saying it's the most likely. And we're not going to draw any conclusions about what is the most likely until we've finished the next 4 articles in Medium that will explore the other 4 alternatives. Right now, I am leaning towards the gold standard being the most likely. And that sets up a very interesting dynamic for Bitcoin. And here is that dynamic. And we didn't talk about it in the article, but because of all of the comments that we've been getting from the article, I just wanted to make this clear. I believe that we are going to see $100,000 Bitcoin, regardless of it being adopted as the final solution to the credit debt problem. But to get to the $10 million figure, it will have to be the solution. And that sets up a binary outcome of the movement of Bitcoin after this bear market is over. It's either going to start another hyperwave that will take it up to 100,000 and maybe some higher number than that. But we don't want that to happen. Because if that happens, that means it's going to fail and come back down just the way it did from 20,000. That's what a hyperwave does. There's a good side and a bad side to a hyperwave. And again, that's going to become very clear to everybody on Friday when we do our workshop. What I want to see happen is I don't want to see a hyperwave develop in the next round up for Bitcoin. I want it to become an S-curve that is very different than a hyperwave. It might look the same as it starts up. The difference will be that when it gets to certain levels, somewhere around $400,000, where it can compete with the price of gold and the amount of gold in the world, which is about $7.5 trillion, and at $400,000 Bitcoin, we will be at that $7.5 trillion range, and we'll be able to compete with the gold standard. But somewhere between 100,000 and 400,000, what we're going to see is either adoption of a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard. And whoever wins that battle, the other party is going down. It will be a hyperwave for Bitcoin, and it will go through a 5, 6, and 7 and return back to the bottom. If Bitcoin wins that battle, then gold is going to drop very, very sharply. And as we get closer and closer to those kinds of decisions, we'll go into much, much more detail as we try to follow it along with everybody else in the world. Now, that still leaves the most probable outcome, unfortunately, which is default on the debt. Because to get either a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard in time, where the world has a choice and central banks have a choice, we need time for either the world to come to the conclusion that a gold standard again will work. And that's going to take many months and possibly years to work out the details of that, in which time we might have the solution forced on us in the form of a default, because that's out of no one's control. Nobody can control if and when the world is forced to default on debt. Okay, so I just wanted to make that clear. We didn't go into that kind of granularity in our piece because we were only talking about Bitcoin and the possible path up to $10 million. But I did want to make that clear that I'm not saying that Bitcoin is going to be the winner of this battle. It is one of 4 or 5 choices. It's the one I prefer. And we didn't go into a lot of detail about why I prefer that. That will come at the end of the series of Medium articles. What we are trying to do with this 5-piece analysis is, first of all, try to provoke comments from a lot of very intelligent people that are reading this series or will read this series after our first one on Bitcoin, to give me other alternatives to a bunch of assumptions that we're making. Number one, we're assuming that there's a problem that must be solved, which is the debt problem and the credit problem. My thesis and what we tried to build in this first piece is to show the imbalance between world wealth and world debt. And world wealth is still greater than world debt. The problem is world debt is growing 3 times faster than world wealth. And we tried to bring a lot of numbers together, breaking that down to show that we have crossed a line in which central banks and the banking system and the world in general has lost control of the ability to control the debt relative to the total GDP of the world and the wealth of the world. That's the thesis. We then provide 5 solutions to that problem. One of them is Bitcoin, one is a gold standard, one is defaulting on the debt, one is growing out of the problem, and then the 5th one is a theoretical basket that has been proposed by China and other ones and has been debated in economic forums for years, which is a basket of currencies and a basket of commodities, and it might include something like gold and Bitcoin. And that will be the last thing we're going to look at. So that's the overall picture. All we did in this first one is we picked one of the 5, which is Bitcoin, to go into depth of what would it take from today's price of $3,500 to get Bitcoin into a position to compete with the other 4 solutions if the world has a choice. And so that's why we called it the long and winding road, because it's going to be very difficult. We both believe, Leah and I, that it's going to happen, meaning when this bear market is over in Bitcoin, we're going to go much, much higher, regardless of everything else. But how it goes higher and what are the necessary steps for developers to take and for the crypto community to take to get it to go higher, and then where are the bumps along the way? And that's what the article does, is it lays out a roadmap of going from $1,000 Bitcoin up to 100,000 fairly easily, we believe, and then struggling to get up to 400,000, and then going to war with gold, which we believe will be won by Bitcoin if we can get Bitcoin over $100,000, because we think that many of the gold hoarders and the gold bugs will see that Bitcoin is actually superior to gold in what those people that were in gold believe to be true about gold. Bitcoin does it and does it better, in our opinion. And then we'll go into other things after that. So that's kind of the background. Now, there's a difference between what we would prefer to happen and what is going to happen. What we would prefer to happen is because of the ranking that we give each of the 5 choices in terms of the collateral damage that will definitely occur. This thing is not going to go away easily. It's not going to go quietly into that good night. It is going to be a battle royale between creditors and debtors. There's a counterparty in both cases, and somebody's going to be badly hurt by whichever of the 5 solutions finally comes about. So we started with Bitcoin because that's one we believe is the best, but we do not believe it is the most probable. And to understand that, you're going to have to wait till you read our future articles on the other 4 possible solutions. The most important thing to consider about where we are in the macroeconomic picture is what is in front of us is deflationary, not inflationary. You try to inflate yourself out of a debt problem. And that's what happened in Zimbabwe and in Argentina, and now is going on in Turkey and in Italy, and what happened in the Weimar Republic. Is you try to inflate yourself out of a depressed state. That's not where we are. We've already got way, way, way too much debt. And a default on the debt or any other solution will not be inflationary. It will be massively deflationary. Much worse, because of the implications. And we will do a whole webinar on that at some time, but that's not what we are worried about today. We have no inflation or almost no inflation, and all inflation means is you're printing more money than you have demand for.
Ty, can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
People forget, but we have an inflationary target every single year of 2%, which is healthy. So while you continue, everybody says that, talking about inflation is bad. Actually, for the good growth of an economy, although all of this, obviously, economic theory can be debated, I just wanted to put out there that inflation is targeted every year in order to be for at least how our current government believes to be a growth strategy and like a healthy growth strategy, it being if you can keep it at 2%. And so
that's exactly right. And right to my point, because we can't even hit that 2% target. Keeping interest rates at 0 for 10 years couldn't hit a 2% target. What does that tell you? It tells you there is no inflationary pressure. And that's a very big, long debate. But so my point about deflation versus inflation is not something for us to worry about. Paul Volcker killed that back in 1979 and 1980. But the second part of the question was this observation that I made earlier in this talk today is I do not want another hyperwave in Bitcoin, but it's probable. It's probably going to start and look like a hyperwave as we run up to 100,000. But I don't want it to end as a hyperwave. It will end as a hyperwave and come all the way back down again, because all hyperwaves do, unless it is going to the next stage, which will be the solution to the world debt problem. Then we will go to $10 million, at which Bitcoin will be worth approximately $200 trillion, which will put it in a position to be used by the world as the reserve currency of the world, with a reserve of 40% against the debt and about 3 times GDP. And we can go into those numbers later. But yes, hyperwaves are very, very important. And you can make a lot of money on them when they're going up, but you must know that they all end. And when they do end, they go all the way back to the beginning. We don't want this next move in Bitcoin. For those that are Bitcoiners and believe in Bitcoin, we don't want it to take the form of a hyperwave. It will look like one up to 100,000, but then it has the ability to change into an S curve where the top will be much, much, much higher and will not come down, at least for many, many generations. So that's just a broad overview. And we're not going to actually look at a chart because I'm still uninterested in the Bitcoin chart. It's going to 1,000 in my opinion. It hit 3,400 this morning. The reason Leah brought it up is because it took a very big move down to 3,401, not hitting the old lows at 3,180 in this bear market, but looking very nasty. But then that 30-minute candle that was red turned green and came all the way back up, and then bounced all the way back up over 35 to 35.90. And now it's settling back down into the 35 range. So in any case, long-term picture, and a lot of people on Twitter have been challenging us, saying that we did not make a call back in December that the hyperwave in Bitcoin was over when we broke down from 19,666. And I commented just very quickly, all you have to do is go back and look at any and all of the last years of any of our vlogs, and you'll see that that's not true. We pinpointed it at the top. Nobody can get out at 19,666, but we got out within a week or 10 days of the top. And we said at that point, it was going all the way down to 1,000. We got down to 17,000, we got down to 13,000, we got down to 10,000, 8,500, 7,500, big debate, big debate, big debate. That's the bottom, that's the bottom. Gets down to 6,000 over and over and over again, big debate, big debate. But I was uninterested in that debate because hyperwave tells us where it's going down to 1,000. Well, finally 6,000 broke sharply, and we dropped from 6,000 to 3,000, making everybody who was publicly stating that 6,000 was the ultimate bottom not look foolish, but simply shows how powerful this hyperwave technique is. And now we're messing around in the 3,000 area. Well, that's fine, and it could bounce back to 4,000. It could go to 5,000. I don't think it can get above 4,200, but maybe it can. But I don't care. It doesn't matter. Hyperwaves are hyperwaves. Bitcoin isn't a hyperwave. It's going down to $1,000. But who cares? Because then it's going to 100,000, and it could go to 10 million. And that's what we're trying to do in this article. So people that have been painting us as anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto, just don't understand the fact what the long picture has always been. The reason Leah and I started doing this a year ago is our complete understanding and belief of what Bitcoin is and where it's going to go. But don't tell me what to buy. Tell me when to buy it. And this is not yet the time to buy it. Hyperwave is something that people need to understand in order to understand all of these cross currents that are taking place in the macroeconomic picture. So with that, thank you very much.